Mr. Darcy could have married Caroline Bingley. She represented the match society would expect: wealthy, well-connected, accomplished by every standard his world recognized. She understood the rules. She played them perfectly. He couldn't stand her. And across the border between Austen and Gaskell, John Thornton could have married someone who understood the economics of Milton, someone practical, unsentimental, built for the industrial North. He didn't want that either. Perhaps what drew both men, and what fascinates me about reading these two novels together, is that they fell in love with women who were free to do something they themselves could not. Darcy lost his father before the events of the novel and inherited Pemberley while still a relatively young man. He became master of an estate and guardian of his teenage sister Georgiana before he had fully become himself. The seriousness, the weight, the composure he carries everywhere, some of that may have come not from pride alone, but from having to be responsible before he was ready. And then Wickham happened. A man Darcy had known since childhood almost eloped with Georgiana, 15 years old, in pursuit of her fortune. Darcy intervened in time. But that kind of early betrayal, that kind of responsibility carried quietly and alone, leaves a mark. When Elizabeth visits Pemberley as a tourist, she hears something striking from his housekeeper. Mrs. Reynolds describes a man who has been the kindest, most generous landlord since he was 4 years old, beloved by his tenants, never an unkind word to anyone who depended on him.
If I were to go through the world, I could not meet with a better master. But I have always observed that they who are good-natured when children are good-natured when they grow up.
Austen presents a striking contrast between Darcy's public reserve and this private reputation. One way of reading him is that the warmth Mrs. Reynolds describes simply has no room in the social world the novel shows us. Whether that is a choice or a consequence, the novel doesn't say. John Thornton's hardness has a clearer origin. His father went bankrupt and died in disgrace. Thornton was young and suddenly responsible, not just for himself, but for his mother, a woman of fierce pride and no resources. He rebuilt from nothing. He worked his way from a draper's shop to a mill owner, carrying the weight of a family that depended entirely on whether he could make the numbers work. So when Thornton holds the line on wages, when he refuses to let sentiment interfere with economic logic, when he maintains a principled distance from the suffering that his decisions produce, this is not simply ideology. It is the logic of a man who has experienced what happens when things fall apart, and who has learned to distrust decisions governed primarily by feeling.
Who's that?
Gaskell is careful about this. Thornton genuinely believes in what he does. But he holds those beliefs at a cost, and the cost becomes visible when Margaret arrives. Someone who has never had to make the choice between feeling and survival, and who therefore never made it. One way of reading Elizabeth Bennet is that she moves through the world with an ease Darcy has perhaps never had. She talks to everyone with the same warmth, the ridiculous and the grand, the Bennets and the Bingleys. She laughs in rooms where Darcy holds himself rigid. She says what she thinks without calculating the social consequences. She is publicly, cheerfully, entirely herself, in every room, in every company. It is tempting to see in Darcy's attraction to Elizabeth something beyond admiration, perhaps a recognition that she is free to do what his position, his responsibility, his particular history have made inaccessible to him. The novel doesn't say this directly, but it is hard to read their dynamic without wondering. Margaret Hale does something more legible for Thornton. She sees his workers with a directness that his economic logic doesn't easily permit. She goes to them when they're sick. She speaks for them when no one else will. She acts from feeling rather than calculation, steps in front of a crowd of rioters not from strategy, but from uncalculated human response. Thornton watches this, and I think recognizes something. Not someone unlike him, but someone expressing values he has long subordinated to the demands of industry, and perhaps to the demands of survival. Both men experienced serious responsibilities early in life, and both present themselves to the world with a striking emotional reserve. Both had to become responsible before they had the chance to simply be. And perhaps that is what makes this pattern worth noticing. Neither Darcy nor Thornton fell in love with someone who reflected their public selves. Caroline embodies the values Darcy was raised to admire, and he finds her insufferable. The women they fell in love with are free to do the things they themselves cannot. But I don't think it's quite right to say they fell in love with freedom itself. Neither Elizabeth nor Margaret sets out to change these men. Neither gives them lessons, neither tries to rescue them. They simply live according to values the men had almost forgotten were possible. The change belongs to Darcy and Thornton themselves. Perhaps what they fell in love with was not freedom, but the possibility that they too could live differently. And perhaps there is something else in these choices, something neither novel states directly, but both quietly suggest. By choosing Elizabeth, Darcy chose the mother of children who would never have to learn his reserve. By choosing Margaret, Thornton chose the mother of children who would never have to choose between feeling and survival. These men were shaped by what their world required of them. The hardness, the composure, the distance, they didn't choose it. It was handed to them, along with the estate, along with the mill, along with everything else. But in choosing who they chose, they made sure the next generation wouldn't have to carry it the same way. The men couldn't break free themselves, but they chose someone who could make sure the cycle didn't continue.
I've been a selfish being all my life. As a child, I was given good principles, but was left to follow them in pride and conceit. And such I might still have been, but for you.
Two men, two different novels, two completely different worlds. Both became responsible before they had the chance to simply be. Both falling in love with women who carried, easily and openly, what their lives had required them to set down. Austen and Gaskell could have written powerful men who simply rescued the heroine. Instead, they wrote powerful men who needed to change, not by becoming stronger, but by becoming more fully themselves. The women don't save them. They just make another way of living seem possible, for perhaps the first time. Tell me in the comments, do you think Darcy and Thornton were drawn to Elizabeth and Margaret because of who those women were, or because of who those women let them be? And does the distinction matter? I'm Sana. This is Monica's Pie. The story's never just the story.